Welcome to Finding Hope, The End to Suffering. Hosted by psychologist, author, and co-founder of the Colorado Institute for Conflict Resolution and Creative Leadership, Dr. Barry Weinhold, with national radio host, award-winning producer, and inspirational speaker, Patricia Raskin.
Hi, Patricia.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Barry, and hi, everyone. And welcome back to the wonderful podcast series that Barry Weinhold has created. And it's his brainchild. And it's called Finding Hope, The End to Suffering. So welcome, Barry. It's great to be here. And it's great to be here with our amazing guest who's been through so much and has so much resilience, Mary Ochters. And she is the author of 6 Funerals and a Wedding. So a pretty amazing book. And we've talked a lot to her about what she's been through, between the California wildfire. And then in the span of 8 weeks, she lost her husband, her father, and her youngest son, all in tragic ways, and 2 of them to suicide. So, it's just amazing. And now Mary has become a master grief coach counselor. She has a master grief coach certification. She has been a nurse for 22 years, a registered nurse and a life coach. So everything she has been through has really helped her to help thousands of other people. So we are so glad to have you, Mary. I interviewed you on my show and I said to Barry, this is a perfect guest for the topic of finding hope in the end to suffering. So thanks for coming back.
Yeah,
all right.
Thank you.
Very welcome.
Yeah. So what were some of the processes? I mean, how did you get through this? Who was your support system? How did you kind of move up through all of this?
Well, I feel like I was fortunate in that I do have, I had 5 siblings, and it was just that everyone came. Within one day, everybody was there, and sad to say, they were back again in 8 weeks for my son. So there was nothing like that. Just having them, be with me, and it just meant the world. And you find out who your true friends are, and that made such a difference to me. Just people being with me. And I knew they were sad too, and they were supportive. And you're asking what worked, and I felt that love so deeply. And I say sometimes it carried me. But I felt like it carried me in a fun way. My spirit was. I sat in the car, and I could see the people going into it wasn't a church, but for my son's funeral. And I thought, I don't know how I can do this. I couldn't stop crying. And then suddenly I cried out, I guess, and I got up and I walked, and there was a line. Oh gosh, it was so long of people. I started at the end. That's where I approached. I walked up the line and said hello to every person. It was like something possessed me. You get what you need when you ask, is the way I feel. How am I going to do this? I got acquainted with Tony Robbins, the man who does the seminars. There was a group of, he was doing a show, and a group of psychologists in Del Mar, a community where I lived at the time, Del Mar, California, wanted people to be on the show that had overcome tragedy. And they didn't choose us. They felt that would be a problem with the suicide and possible copycats. But we went to his seminars, and he provided me with a coach for 6 years. He provided it. Wow. And I talked to this wonderful man every week. Oh, he was just such a blessing. And we didn't talk about the deaths of my family members. We talked about moving on. I'd say, I'm having a bad day, and I feel like I'm obsessed with all these negative thoughts. And he'd say, well, let's talk about what's going right. And he taught me about the value of humor. I thought I laughed enough. He said, really, it'll be your best friend. And then within a year and a half, I started seeing a man that I'd known at work. And what made him different, and what worked with him, was that he was interested. He never once tried to solve my problem, never offered to help me, nothing. He was just interested and empathetic. And I felt like that's what I needed. I didn't want help. I didn't want anybody to come in and take over and take the place of my husband. And I had sons. I definitely didn't want anybody to take a step in with that. And, he just innately did it perfectly. And so I had a partner to live my life with after 2 years of being without my husband. And I have to say, it's had its challenges, as all relationships do, but what a happy life I've had. And, it's been a nice hand to hold going through the steps of all of this. And this is my late husband, Bruce.
Barry, can you speak to what Mary just talked about?
Sure.
The great power of love and the great power of listening and empathy.
Yeah. Well, interesting. Sometimes I experienced this. I don't know, Mary, if you did, but after my wife died, a lot of her friends, particularly, came to me. Most of them were females, and they wanted to take away my pain. They wanted to comfort and take. They meant well, but I didn't want anybody to take away my pain. And so finally, I had to tell them thanks, but no thanks. And then I found the most support. I had I was part of a men's support group. And if I hadn't had that group, I don't know how I would have made it, because they operated differently with me. They said, boy, I don't know what I would do if I were in your situation. It's terrible. And it would be hard to think about how to handle it. But what are you going to do? What steps are you going to take? So they got me mobilized. And I think that's important sometimes in getting help, to help you mobilize, to start to take, just baby steps maybe, but towards the healing process that you have to go through. And that was really important to me. And I don't know if you experienced anything like that.
I did. It's funny. I guess there's just a limited amount of behaviors you can have. And I experienced that so much. And in the way I experienced it was with Pierre, the person I met at work. He wasn't looking to make me happy in that way. And I had more than a couple of people say, I really want to help you. I wasn't as clear as you were. I didn't know why that bothered me, but I just thought, no, this is kind of an inside job. But my dad was a quad at that point. He'd been a quad for about 3 months, and he could not talk.
Oh, wow.
But he was on a ventilator. He couldn't breathe on his own.
Oh, wow.
And I was obsessed for a short period of time asking myself, what would Dad say? What would Dad say? Because he had so much clarity around issues like that. And he wouldn't tell me what to do, but he would ask me. So I kind of played that around in my head, acting, what would Dad say? Dad would say, this is awful, Mary. What are you going to do? And I started thinking, I'm going to survive.
Yeah.
I don't know how.
Yeah.
But I will. I'll figure it out. And it was so funny how life works.
Yeah. Well, I had a similar situation, Mary. About a year and a half after Barbara's death, I met Janae, and we were married very quickly, because it was so obvious to both of us that this was the right person. And so, but unfortunately, I still was not finished with my grief process. And so I would go to work at the university, and I'd come home and I would be in tears. And Janae had the love and the compassion and the understanding to just be willing to hold me while I just unwound from, things happen during your day that remind you of your whatever that you're trying to get through. And so when that happened, I would need to come home and just be held. and be comforted. And thank goodness I had Janae there to do that for me, because it was tremendously healing, and it also was a very important part of our relationship, that she would be there to comfort and heal me, help me heal from my grief, from
Mhm.
and it takes obviously a very I don't know what kind of person it takes, a very loving person to be able to do that.
Barry, can you say more about that for the listeners? The whole concept of just having someone hold you, just
Oh,
the
yeah.
holding.
Yeah,
Talk
yeah.
about that.
Well, actually, what happens to people when they lose a loved one, it often triggers memories of early abandonment.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I had early abandonment in my life. My mother had postpartum depression, maybe even postpartum psychosis, because she just could not handle taking care of me. And finally, at about 8 weeks, that was obvious, and I went to live with my father's mother and his sister, and during the week, and then on weekends they would come and get me when both parents were available, because my mother just was not operating very effectively. So it is important, I think, to have that kind of support. Because things will come up from your past that they bleed through, as I said about conflict. The experiences you've had in the past with abandonment and loss will show up again in any current abandonment or feeling of abandonment and loss. And so, and if you don't deal with that part of it, it means eventually you may get through it, but it may take a lot longer.
Mhm. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but what I'm hearing from both of you is the tremendous benefits and healing that comes from holding and listening and empathy and not fixing,
Right.
but just being there.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Mary, let me ask you about sort of the whole idea of that if only mindset. And I was actually talking about that today. That whole kind, if only I shoulda, woulda, coulda, and if I had done this or that, which doesn't really do anything for us and doesn't help us move on.
Yeah.
What do you say about that? That kind of if only or shoulda, woulda, coulda.
Well, what I have to say about that is that it seems to be a human trait, something we do. We think we could have done something, but if we were able to mysteriously go back, we wouldn't have done anything. We would
Right.
have done what we did before. That's
Sure.
our best.
Right.
That's what we've got to offer. And no, that didn't haunt me to the best of my thinking. That didn't haunt me, but I dream sometimes that I was able to get to them before. And so, yeah, I wish I could have done something, but outside of the guilt that I had, that I realized resolved fairly quickly. No, there wasn't anything that persisted there. I did get a lot of comfort from knowing they were in peace.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
And I do believe my son's motivation for suicide was 100% different than my husband's, which saddens me because I think it was an unforeseen accident. He was trying out some his behavior, and it just went too far, and that kills me, just kills me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think nothing in the world I could have done to change it. So no, I was fortunate it didn't. But if I was asked, what should I do? I would say find a way to stop that. It's not productive, and it's taking energy you can use to, realize you used your goodness for goodness, and you would have done it if you could have, but you couldn't.
Mary,
Well,
go ahead.
yeah, I
Go
can
ahead,
say a
Barry.
little bit
Go
about
ahead,
that.
please.
Yeah, actually, almost everybody that's experienced the loss has something come up called survivor guilt.
Mhm.
And you were just talking about that, and that's the name for it.
Mhm.
And generally, people think about, could I have done anything different that could have prevented this? Or even, why did it happen to that person and not to me?
Uh-huh.
That's
Yes.
often comes up. Why
I've
did I
heard that a
survive?
lot.
Yeah, well, in my situation, both my wife and I experienced severe falls on a ski slope, and I survived and she didn't. So it was pretty evident that that would come up for me in that situation. So,
Mhm.
but it really is a factor that it's part of the healing process to recognize that and to know that there, as you just said very eloquently, you've realized there was nothing you could have done different to make it any change in the situation.
Mm.
That's what people have to do.
I have a question around this that I think listeners would be interested in. That is, I mean, for both of you, Barry, you are a psychotherapist. Mary, you're a grief counselor, but you've also been for therapy and coaching.
Mhm.
How do people know that they're with the right coach therapist? Because sometimes they stay for years and it's not the right person. What would you both say about that?
Would you like me to go first?
Why don't you go, Mary?
Okay. Um, I have stopped going to certain people. I never had any bad experience or anything like that, but I've stopped because I think I've gone as far as I could go with this person. I
I've
was
had that
aware
too.
of that. Right.
had that too.
Nothing went wrong, but
No, but
that
it's
was
like
fine.
you've gotten what you needed.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Exactly.
And it's just listen, stepping back. If you're wondering, step back and just kind of listen to that gut feeling. Is this what I'm looking for? It's always or most often great to just get it all out in a private situation with someone who's well educated on human behavior and things that happen. It's wonderful. But if you don't, I think the key is to keep your eyes on how has this benefited me? And ask for it. If you have a rapport with the person, ask for it. And if you still don't get it, find someone that
Yeah.
you get it from. Keep your eye on the goal. I think that's probably what it would be. Yeah.
Yeah. Barry, what do you think?
Well, actually, I always, if somebody says, can you recommend somebody to help me with this? I say, well, I usually give them three names, but I say, interview the person
Mhm.
Oh, that's good.
and basically ask them questions about, I mean, each person has their own kind of life experience they want to have this person help them with. Ask them if they've had similar life experiences and how they've handled it. And if they say it's none of your business, that's not the right therapy. I mean, I think a therapist has to be transparent enough to say,
Mhm.
no, I've never dealt with that, or yes,
Mhm.
I've had this happen to me, and this is how I've dealt with it. That's first.
Mhm.
And then when I see a person asks they want to see me, I do a 20-minute free consult with them to see if initially I feel like I'm the right person for them to deal with the
Mhm.
issues that they are dealing with. And I
Mhm.
recommend that you request a 20-minute consultation if you a free one, or maybe even an hour free if you can get it. And then I go with very, very short-term, time-limited contracts. I say, okay, let's do 3 sessions and see if we can work together
Yeah.
effectively.
Very
And
good.
if we can, then I extend it another 3. And I don't go long term. And then if at some point after maybe going through these initial short term stages, they want to do more long term therapy, then we make a separate contract for that. And
Mhm.
it sometimes is open ended, but sometimes it's also time limited
Mhm.
for the next 3 months or the next 6 months or whatever. So
Yeah.
I opt because what the research shows that if people have a time limit, they work harder.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, right. And if they think, well, this is going to go on for a long time, they kind of stretch it out. And so I kind of force them to be much more efficient at the process by setting a time limit.
Yeah. And these are really important questions, for all of us, because we all deal with things. We may not have the same kind of suffering, and it may not all come at once. And I think that's what makes your story so amazing is, Mary, you dealt with so many crises all at one time and sudden loss. Sudden, it's kind of like in going through COVID, where all of a sudden things are just taken away.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that makes it really, really difficult. And I think it's amazing how you're helping so many wonderful people. So what we're going to do is close for this segment. And when we come back, we're going to ask Mary about everything she's been through. She has found love again in her life, and she has found light again in her life. We're going to talk about that.
I have a question too. I want to ask it too. And
Go ahead, Barry.
I'll wait till the next segment and ask it.
Okay.
Oh, good. A surprise question.
Uh-huh.
All right. So listen, we've been interviewing today Mary Ogders. Did I say that right, Mary? Ogders.
It's like Rogers.
Rogers. Mary.
Without the R. Yeah, so it's
Okay.
Odgers. Yeah, it's
Odgers,
a unique one.
All right. So Mary Ogders is a writer, a registered nurse of 22 years, and a life coach. And she also now is a master grief coach in certification. And you can look up 6 Funerals and a Wedding to read her memoir.
This episode was brought to you by the Colorado Institute for Conflict Resolution and Creative Leadership. Find out more about these resources at weinholds.org. Dr. Weinhold is the author or co-author of 75 books on psychology, including his latest book, Get Real: The Hazards of Living Out of Your False Self, available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and more. Patricia Raskin is the host of the nationally recognized program, The Patricia Raskin Positive Living Show, and is currently heard on VoiceAmerica.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. New episodes of Finding Hope: The End to Suffering can be found every Wednesday. If you like the show, please leave a review and give us a rating.